From level 1 fodder to level 7 gods, every Pokemon fits somewhere on this power hierarchy, but the system is completely broken. We'll get to how a cicada shell literally sometimes beats gods. But first, professional punching bags that pay rent on every route, participation trophy recipients forgotten by their own fans, and literal deities defeated by the power of friendship. Starting at the absolute bottom, where dignity goes to die and every trainer's journey begins with the same pathetic lineup. Level 1, Fodder. The Pokemon that exist purely to make your starter feel good about itself. Welcome to Route 1, where dreams go to die and dignity is optional. Caterpie evolves into Metapod, which is literally just a cocoon that can't move. This thing's entire evolutionary strategy involves becoming completely helpless just to escape being stepped on by every trainer who walks by. It's like nature looked at the most vulnerable state possible and said, yes, this should be a Pokemon. Weedle desperately grows stingers because being completely defenseless wasn't working out. But even with those poison barbs, it still gets destroyed by literally anything that breathes in its general direction. These creatures represent Game Freak's idea of a fair fight. If you can't beat a glorified caterpillar, maybe Pokemon training isn't for you. But here's where it gets ridiculous. Rattata is basically just a mouse because Game Freak apparently ran out of creative descriptions after their first 150 entries. They looked at this purple rat and thought, you know what? Let's just call it what it is and move on. It's the Pokemon equivalent of naming your pet dog Dog. The crown jewel of this tier is Pidgey, appearing on many early routes like it pays rent to Nintendo. This bird shows up everywhere with the enthusiasm of a participation trophy, flapping around Route 1, Route 2, Route 3, and basically every patch of grass in the known Pokemon universe. It's like Game Freak decided one generic bird could represent all of nature's diversity. These creatures have very low base stats that make actual household pets look threatening. We're talking about Pokemon that lose battles to strong wind and somehow still survive in the wild. Yet somehow, Rattata can supposedly bite with crushing force while being small enough to fit in your pocket. This tiny mouse with suspiciously deadly teeth weighs less than a bag of chips. Pokemon logic strikes again. The real kicker? These professional punching bags are supposed to represent nature's ecosystem. They're meant to be wild creatures surviving in harsh environments, but they're so weak that literal 10-year-olds capture them with balls made of apricorns. Imagine being a wild animal and losing a fight to fruit technology operated by a child. Rattata appears in tall grass across multiple regions, suggesting it's either incredibly adaptable or just really bad at hiding. For a mouse Pokemon, it sure doesn't seem to understand the concept of avoiding predators. It's like finding the same lost tourist in every city you visit. These Route 1 residents exist to teach us that in Pokemon's world, even the bottom of the food chain has evolutionary potential. Caterpie eventually becomes Butterfree, Weedle turns into Beedrill, and even Pidgey evolves twice. It's just really sad potential that starts with being everyone's punching bag. Route 1 Fodder proves that Pokemon operates on a universe where weakness is temporary, but embarrassment is forever. These creatures shouldn't logically survive in the same world as dragons and psychic monsters, but somehow they do. But at least these Pokemon have the excuse of being designed for beginners. What's worse is when Game Freak creates Pokemon that serve absolutely no purpose at all. Level 2 Dex Fillers. Pokemon that exist not because they serve a purpose, but because Game Freak needed to hit their quota for new creatures. Every generation needs roughly 100 new Pokemon, and after you design the starters, legendaries, and obvious powerhouses, you still need to fill about 70 slots with something. Enter the participation trophy recipients. Meet the Pokemon so forgettable that even their own fans forget they exist until someone mentions them in a tier list. These creatures occupy that weird middle ground where they're not embarrassingly weak like Caterpie, but they're also not good enough to matter in any meaningful way. They're the statistical equivalent of background NPCs, who got accidentally promoted to main character status. Dunsparce waited decades for an evolution, and when it finally got one in Generation 9, Dudunsparce, fans collectively agreed it somehow made things worse. This land snake Pokemon spent years as the poster child for forgotten creatures, only to receive an evolution that literally just makes it longer. It's like Game Freak looked at fan complaints about Dunsparce being underwhelming and decided to make it underwhelming but bigger. Quillfish represents the poster child for this entire tier. This pufferfish is forgettable to most fans and rarely seen on big-tier teams. It has a unique water poison typing that could be interesting, but stats so mediocre that it might as well not exist. Quillfish sits in the Pokédex like that one person at work who shows up every day, but nobody can remember what their job actually is. Then there's Delibird, whose gimmick is gift-giving because it's apparently too polite to actually fight anyone. Present either deals damage or heals the opponent, making Delibird the only Pokémon that might accidentally help its enemies. This thing embodies the participation trophy mentality so completely that its main attack is being nice to people. These Pokémon have the statistical presence of background extras in a movie. They're decent enough to not be embarrassing when you use them, but not good enough to make anyone remember the experience. Their base stats hover around that magical 400 to 450 total range, where they're functional but forgettable. Dunsparce has been memed into relevance purely because fans felt bad for it, which might be the most Pokémon thing that's ever happened. The community created an entire folklore around this unremarkable snake because collective guilt is apparently a valid reason for Pokémon popularity. It became famous for being forgotten, which created a weird paradox where everyone knows about the Pokémon nobody knows about. The cruel irony hits when you realize some of these fillers have unique typing combinations that could be incredible. Quillfish's water poison type should dominate certain matchups, but its stats suggest Game Freak designed it during a coffee break between working on actually important Pokémon. These creatures represent wasted potential in its purest form. Dunsparce's evolution controversy proves that sometimes getting what you want makes things worse. Fans begged for a Dunsparce evolution for years, and when they finally got one, it was just Dunsparce stretched out like taffy. The monkey's paw granted their wish with maximum disappointment. Dex Fillers prove that not every Pokémon can be special, and sometimes mediocrity is its own achievement in a world of constant power creep. They're the statistical equivalent of getting a C+ on a group project. Not great, not terrible, just they're taking up space. But what happens when Game Freak designs Pokémon around one incredibly weird gimmick that somehow actually works? Level 3 Niche Warriors. Pokémon designed around a single gimmick so weird that it actually becomes viable. Welcome to the One-Trick Pony Hall of Fame, where having one incredibly specific talent somehow trumps being well-rounded. These creatures prove that Pokémon's backwards logic rewards specialization over versatility, even when that specialization makes absolutely no sense. Wobbuffet wins by making your opponent hurt themselves. This blue punching bag sits there, takes hits, and reflects damage back like the world's most passive-aggressive bouncer. It doesn't attack, it doesn't move first, it just exists and makes your opponent hurt themselves. The strategy is so bizarre that Wobbuffet has been restricted or heavily regulated in organized formats at times due to its stally shutdown playstyle. Game Freak created a Pokémon that wins battles through pure spite. Ditto wins by playing Identity Crisis. This pink blob copies opponents and becomes a near-exact copy, which makes it an existentially awkward but effective gimmick. Ditto can't function as itself, so it copies everyone else's homework and somehow gets better grades. Transform is the only move Ditto needs because being yourself is apparently overrated in the Pokémon universe. When battles become mirror matches, Ditto essentially wins by having an existential breakdown and deciding other people's identities work better. Shedinja. Gods fear it unless you have the one right move. This cicada shell is the ultimate gamble with immunity quirks that make it technically immortal against most attacks. Legendary Pokémon with universe-destroying power can't touch Shedinja unless they happen to know the right type of move. It's like having God mode enabled, but only against specific attacks. The catch? Shedinja has exactly one hit point. This thing can wall dragons and psychic gods, but dies if you breathe on it wrong. Sand damage kills it, poison kills it, confusion damage kills it. Basically anything that doesn't count as a direct attack becomes lethal. Shedinja makes every battle a high-stakes gamble wrapped in a cicada shell. Either your opponent can't touch you and you become an unstoppable wall, Or they have one super effective move and you explode immediately. These Pokemon break the fundamental rules of game design by being simultaneously overpowered and completely useless depending on the matchup. Wobbuffet can shut down offensive powerhouses, but crumbles against setup sweepers. Ditto copies the strongest Pokemon on the field, but gets destroyed if it transforms into something weak. Shedinja walls entire teams or dies to entry hazards before it even gets to battle. The competitive scene had to create special rules around these creatures because their gimmicks were too weird for normal play. They represent Pokemon's willingness to completely break conventional wisdom about balance and strategy. Niche warriors prove that in Pokemon's universe, being really good at one specific thing beats being decent at everything, even when that one thing defies all logic. But sometimes you need Pokemon that actually show up consistently and do their jobs without the drama. Level 4 Solid Workhorses. Pokemon that show up, do their jobs, and don't cause drama. Meet the backbone of competitive teams. Creatures that embody the statistical equivalent of that coworker who always delivers solid results without being flashy about it. These Pokemon don't break the game or dominate tournaments, but they show up consistently and make everything else work better. Crobat evolves via friendship, a rare evolution method that lets a hated cavebat become a remarkably useful pivot. This four-winged speedster transforms from the universally annoying Zubat through pure affection and somehow becomes genuinely good at its job. The evolution method is literally be nice to your Golbot, which is either the most wholesome game mechanic ever created or proof that Pokemon runs on emotional manipulation instead of logic. Think about this transformation for a second. Zubat appears in every cave, annoys every player, and gets knocked out by basically everything that moves. But treat it with enough kindness, and it becomes Crobat, a Pokemon that actually contributes to competitive teams through speed and utility moves. It's like adopting the most annoying coworker and watching them become Employee of the Month through the power of positive reinforcement. Crobat succeeds in competitive play not because of raw power, but because it does its job efficiently. High-speed stats and access to moves like Taunt and Defog make it valuable support, while its Poison Flying typing provides useful resistances. This bat went from cave pest to reliable team player purely through friendship evolution, proving that emotional bonds can override statistical mediocrity. Alakazam is described as extremely intelligent in Pokédex entries, yet remains a glass cannon in fights. Great offense, fragile defenses. This psychic mastermind can calculate complex equations instantly, but somehow gets outsmarted by rock-type Pokemon, who can barely spell their own names. All that intelligence doesn't prevent a well-placed physical attack from ending its career immediately. Alakazam's massive brainpower translates to incredible special attack and speed stats, making it a genuine offensive threat that can hit hard and fast. But those paper-thin defenses mean one strong physical hit ends this supposed genius immediately. Machamp represents the ultimate contradiction in Pokemon logic. Pokédex entries describe this four-armed fighter throwing punches at superhuman speeds, but its signature move, Dynamic Punch, has unreliable accuracy that makes this ultimate fighting machine inconsistent in actual battles. Imagine being capable of superhuman speed and precision, then whiffing on your most important attack, because Game Freak decided accuracy is optional. Machamp often runs more consistent moves like Close Combat, trading its thematic signature attack for something that actually connects with opponents. These Pokemon represent the backbone of competitive teams, not the flashy stars or game-breaking legends, but the reliable support that makes strategies work. They're consistent without being overpowered, useful without being broken, and effective without dominating entire formats. Workhorses are widely valued for consistency rather than broken power, proving that reliability often matters more than raw strength. These are the dependable tools that every team needs. But some Pokemon don't just fill roster spots, they completely reshape how everyone else has to play. Level 5 Tournament Terrors. Pokemon that don't just participate in the competitive scene, they define it, warp it, and occasionally break it completely. These are the Pokemon that make tournament organizers nervous and force entire strategies to revolve around countering them. When these creatures show up on team preview screens, Experienced players immediately start calculating damage outputs and switching their game plans. Garchomp dominated Generation 4 tournaments so completely that its Mega Evolution traded some speed for raw power in its Mega form, changing how it was used in tournaments. Think about that for a second. Game Freak created a power-up mechanic that somehow made one of their strongest Pokémon less versatile. Regular Garchomp hits hard and fast, but Mega Garchomp becomes slower than threats it used to outpace. It's the only Pokémon to get actively different from its own upgrade in ways that competitive players didn't always prefer. This Dragon Ground monster shaped team compositions so thoroughly that entire builds existed purely to deal with it. Players constructed around Garchomp counters the way you'd plan a military operation around a specific target. Ice-type moves became more valuable just because they could one-shot this underground dragon, and Pokémon like Mamoswine saw increased usage purely as Garchomp answers. Rotom Wash, a literal appliance form, became a meta favorite due to its odd typing, utility, and ability to handle many common threats. This household appliance somehow earned a spot on competitive teams through its electric water typing and access to key moves like Will-O-Wisp. When your laundry equipment becomes tournament viable, you know the meta has reached peak weirdness. The washing machine form gives Rotom resistances to common fire and ground attacks while letting it hit water types super effectively with electric moves. This appliance became a reliable pivot Pokémon, switching in and out of battle while providing utility through status moves. Competitive Pokémon reached the point where ghost-possessed appliances were tournament staples. Landorus Therian became a staple in many competitive teams because of its ability to check a huge swath of threats. This ground-flying genie appears everywhere in competitive play, not because it's creative, but because it's statistically the most reliable answer to common strategies. Its Intimidate ability lowers opposing attack stats, while its own stats let it threaten most of the metagame. These Pokémon turn competitive battles into elaborate rock-paper-scissors matches with calculus attached. Knowing the current meta becomes more important than knowing your own team's synergies. Players spend hours studying usage statistics and matchup charts instead of experimenting with favorite Pokémon, because these meta dominators punish creative team building. Landorus T shaped the competitive landscape so thoroughly that other Pokémon's viability got measured against their ability to handle it. Teams needed answers for this genie, or they'd get steamrolled by its combination of offensive presence and stat-lowering intimidation. The metagame adapted around one Pokémon's existence, proving how completely it warped strategic thinking. Tournament terrors prove that in Pokémon's competitive scene, being overpowered isn't a design flaw. It's a feature that shapes how everyone else approaches the game. These creatures force innovation through oppression, making players find new strategies to compete against established dominance. But even these meta-dominators pale in comparison to Pokémon that achieve legendary tier power without legendary tier restrictions. Level 6 Pseudo-Legendaries, the crown princes of Pokémon hierarchy that bridge the gap between regular Pokémon and mythical deities. These Pseudo-Legendaries have legendary level-based stat totals, but are available as normal catches, making them extremely attractive for teams. Game Freak created monsters that dominate competitive play while remaining accessible through normal gameplay, giving players legendary tier power without legendary tier restrictions. Dragonite looks like a friendly mailman who got lost on his way to deliver packages, but it can level entire cities according to its Pokédex entries. This orange dragon somehow flies, despite having tiny wings relative to its massive body, defying every law of physics and aerodynamics known to science. The contrast between its dopey appearance and city-destroying capabilities makes it the ultimate undercover powerhouse. The design evolution from the sleek Dragonair to what fans call Orange Barney remains one of Pokémon's most baffling artistic choices. Dragonair's serpentine elegance gets abandoned for Dragonite's bulky, approachable look that divided the fanbase completely. Some players love the friendly dragon aesthetic, while others mourn the loss of Dragonair's graceful design philosophy. Tyranitar represents the cruel irony of Pokémon typing mechanics. Despite its Pokédex lore about mountain-crushing strength, its rock-dark typing gives an obvious water weakness in game mechanics. This walking disaster gets described as a mountain-destroying force of nature then gets shut down by the most basic water attacks in competitive play. The typing system matters more than physics in Pokemon's universe, turning geological formation destroyers into sitting ducks against common tournament moves. Water-type moves are everywhere in competitive formats, making Tyranidar's impressive stat spread and intimidating presence meaningless when half the opposing team carries standard water attacks. This kaiju gets neutralized by moves that shouldn't even register against something that destroys mountains for fun. Metagross showcases the ultimate narrative irony in Pokemon lore. Designed as a four-brained supercomputer in the entries, yet narrative-friendly plots often let smaller characters prevail through determination and friendship. All that processing power doesn't prevent basic competitive strategies from completely dismantling its game plan. And this mechanical mastermind consistently gets outsmarted by opponents with significantly less computational ability. Four brains working together somehow produce tactical decisions that any human player could see coming. Intelligence means nothing when type matchups and move predictions determine victory, proving that raw processing power can't overcome Pokemon's friendship-powered narrative logic. These Pokemon have legendary-level stats, but none of the legendary restrictions that prevent them from being bred or used in certain tournaments. This design creates creatures that are simultaneously more and less special than actual mythical Pokemon. They're powerful enough to compete with gods, but common enough to build teams around without breaking format rules. Pseudo-legendaries dominate competitive scenes precisely because they offer legendary-level performance with normal Pokemon accessibility. Tournament organizers can't ban them like they do actual legends, so these crown princes become the backbone of serious competitive teams. They're strong enough to matter, but legal enough to use everywhere. Sometimes being almost legendary works better than being actually legendary, especially when tournament rules get involved. They're the Pokemon equivalent of being really good at your job without dealing with the politics of being the boss. But what happens when Game Freak stops pretending there are any limits at all? Level 7. Legendary gods, creatures that supposedly created the universe, control time and space, and bend reality itself. Yet somehow these cosmic deities consistently lose to children armed with friendship and emotional support animals. These are Pokemon that shouldn't exist in the same universe as Caterpie, yet here we are, with gods ending up as catchable boss encounters. Arceus is treated in lore as the creator deity according to Sinnoh mythology. This reality-shaping being birthed Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, essentially creating the fundamental forces that govern existence. But even cosmic beings end up as catchable boss encounters or event distributions, which is inherently hilarious. The creator of everything gets stored in your bag, next to potions and bicycle vouchers like it's no big deal. Think about the logistics here. The being responsible for all of reality becomes another entry in your Pokédex collection. Arceus shaped the cosmos from nothing, but apparently forgot to make itself immune to capture technology invented by humans. It's like finding out you can trap Zeus if you're persistent enough with the right event item. Dialga and Palkia oversee time and space respectively, the fundamental forces that allow reality to function. Dialga's heartbeat literally keeps time moving forward, while Palkia's breathing stabilizes the fabric of space itself. These Pokemon can travel through past, present, and future, warp between dimensions, and destroy entire universes when they work together. But they consistently lose battles to 10-year-olds with teams built on friendship and determination. Dialga can literally stop time, reverse aging, and travel to any point in history. But it still takes turns in battle because even cosmic powers must respect the fundamental rules of JRPG combat. Imagine having control over the flow of time itself and still waiting politely for your opponent to make their move. The Pokemon that governs temporal reality follows turn-based etiquette. Mewtwo was genetically engineered to be the ultimate Pokemon through what the Pokédex calls horrific gene splicing and DNA engineering experiments. Its stats break the game's balance completely, with Mega Mewtwo forms reaching the highest attack values possible. This artificial creature was designed specifically to be unstoppable. Yet Mewtwo's movie arc often resolves through emotional relationship beats rather than pure punching contests, as shown in its movie appearances, proving that narrative convenience overrides genetic perfection. These Pokemon represent Game Freak's approach to escalating mythic power. Power creep often gives later legendaries mythic-sounding powers, which feeds the joke that there's always something bigger. When you've created a god, where do you go from there? Apparently, you create more gods with even more reality-bending abilities. The fact that universe-creating deities can be stored in a PC box alongside your collection of Bidoof raises uncomfortable questions about Pokemon storage technology. Bill's PC system somehow digitizes beings that exist beyond physical reality, converting gods into data packets that sit next to your backup Rattata collection. Palkia can destroy and create entire universes, but gets knocked out by a well-timed earthquake from a ground Pokemon that can't even fly. The Master of Spatial Dimensions loses to creatures that understand basic type matchups better than cosmic physics. Legendary gods showcase the beautiful contradiction at Pokemon's core, where universe-creating deities follow the same battle rules as everything else, proving that even gods must bow to game mechanics and narrative convenience. So what does this all mean? After climbing from professional punching bags to literal gods, power in Pokemon is a mashup of stats, typing, and story. Sometimes narrative beats like friendship actually beat math, creating outcomes that shouldn't exist but somehow work perfectly. This creates a universe where Route 1 fodder evolves into decent Pokemon, while universe-creating deities get caught by children with fruit technology. Pokemon balance is a living, chaotic thing, and that's why we still love it. Remember the cicada shell? That's still our favorite glitch in the system. Comment your single most absurd Pokemon moment, and subscribe if you like kooky deep dives into Pokemon mechanics and lore.